Welcome to Tropic Topics special edition on a Sunday here. It's never good if I'm here on a Sunday talking about the weather, and unfortunately, that's exactly what's going on. I do have some good news for some people and some terrible news for other people. It just depends on exactly where you are across the Panhandle. We're still watching the models here, trying to get an idea of exactly where this is going to track because there are still a lot of variables at play, and we'll try to walk you through all of those things. There's a bunch of little small forces here at play that are helping to guide this thing. So once it gets going, and it looks like it just started to work its way north, it's now going north at 2 miles per hour after being stationary or even slightly drifting south and east over the last 12 hours or so. That has shifted the guidance a little bit off to the east with that eastward movement of the storm. So as long as we don't get a big wobble back off to the west to correct for the guidance change that we've gotten, that's probably where our starting point is going to be. It is still a tropical depression. If you notice the cloud covers in the mid-level there, that is wind shear. We're going to jump right into it. Actually, bring me back, Spencer. We'll come back here. We're going to be talking about anything and everything that has to do with Idalia. And yes, that's how you say that, Idalia. It's E is the pronunciation guide. So Idalia for the I name storm, because things can't be simple even as far as the name goes. But anyways, we're going to be talking all about Idalia and the potential impacts to our area and what we could see, what we won't see, what's most likely, what's not most likely. So I'm going to get to all of that. But if you do have any questions, comments, concerns, things like that you want me to specifically address, make sure to put them in the comment section. If you ask me, what is it going to be like at 7 a.m. in Lake City, I'm not going to answer that question, because if you do that and I have to answer that question and I answer that for everybody, we'll be here until this makes landfall on Wednesday. So let's not go through every spot specific location of a city by city forecast. I'm going to zoom in. You're going to see a generalized forecast for the area, not only for our area, but for the cities that are involved in this, which does include through the Bend as well. So we're going to go through that, and you can get an idea of what your forecast impacts are at the current moment based off of just the generalization, because at the moment, that's where we still are. It's still going to be generalized. It is a forecast that could shift either way, east or west. Just because we've seen it shift east today doesn't mean that we won't see a shift back off to the west if there's some kind of correction. The eastward shift today does bring into play a little more of that friction force. We talked a lot about this with Ian last year with the friction force, and you'll notice looking at the storm, we can go full screen now there, Spencer. For looking at the storm, you'll notice that it is east side loaded. So a lot of the moisture is on the south and east side of that. That's because it is feeling some influence from Hurricane Franklin out there that is off to its north and east. And so that is kind of pulling it off to the east. You will also note that we have a little spin right over the top of us or just off to our south and west. That is the upper level low. And that's the reason why you're getting a west to east wind streak across the Gulf of Mexico. That is the westerly shear that is going to impact this system and is impacting the system right now. It's part of the reason why this isn't going to go through RI over the next 10 to 12 hours and hasn't gone through RI over the last 12 hours because it's being sheared. There's dry air around and it's being sheared. It's being held down. However, that all lifts as it gets closer to landfall. When it gets closer to the northern end of the Gulf of Mexico, that shear disappears. And I do expect that we will go through a period of rapid intensification with this storm. How long that period of rapid intensification is really will determine just how high end topping this can get. And the water temperature, not an issue. We already knew that. We knew that for a while. The waters are really, really warm. So heat content is not an issue. The question is going to be, how much shear does the frontal boundary cause and how much shear holds on as that upper level low stays in place? Once that upper level low lifts, the shear will drop, the storm will start to strengthen and could even strengthen relatively rapidly, although there are a lot of dynamics in play here for what will likely be a relatively small core of the system. So as we dive into this a little bit further, I'm hoping my graphics will move. I think I might have grabbed the wrong clicker. I may need somebody to go get me the other clicker if that's the case. Yeah, just get Jared to come in here. Bring me the other clicker because this one's not working. That's okay. But anyways, as we keep going forward here, you'll see that. So as we talked about with Ian last year, this does have that plausibility of a friction force and a harder turn. All that is the models don't bring in any possibility of friction when discussing tropical activity. This isn't changing either. I don't know why. I don't know why it's not changing for me. Never had this issue before. Just open those doors and see if that works. Yeah, it's not working. Well, this is fun. Sorry about that, guys. Hoping the graphics will start to work for me, but for whatever reason, I can't get them to change. They're just locked onto this. So I'm not real sure what's going on, why the graphics won't change for me. But as we continue to go forward, I'll go through any questions that you do have. I see on here, can you explain barometric pressure, impacts on strength? That's a good one from James there. So as the pressure deepens, all that means is that the storm is strengthening. So as the lower the pressure, the theoretical higher the pressure gradient, which means higher wind speeds, because winds are caused by a difference in pressure. So just because you see a storm deepen down to like 930, something like that, doesn't necessarily mean you're talking about a very strong storm at all. But it does mean that we're talking about the potential of a storm that could produce stronger winds. So I think we've got this figured out. Let's go to the next graphic. Let's see if that'll work. And put that on speaker. Let's go to the next graphic and see if we can't get it to change over. Just press forward. Is it not working? We may have to come back to this. I don't know what's going on. Our link system has frozen on us or something. Oh, there we go. Hey, that worked. All right, let me hit the back button and see if it's going to work now. Nope, still not working for me. Why is this not? So he's going to have to do it? Okay. All right, well, I think we might have gotten the technical stuff out of the way here. We'll stay right here for this second, and then we'll go forward in a minute. But looking at the forecast track, this is from the National Hurricane Center. The cone is always from the National Hurricane Center. It is not our forecast. That is coming directly from them, and that means that what we're getting is the data from the National Hurricane Center. It gets ingested. It's their forecast. And then we just communicate that along the lines. And that's all supposed to be so that we can continue to give you information across the board that's the same, that everybody is saying the same thing, that we're not all giving you a different forecast. But as we're looking at this forecast, and we're going to get into, I see a lot of people questioning, like, when do we need to evacuate? Do we need to evacuate? Do we need to be boarding up our homes? Do we need to do all of those things? We'll dive into that in just a little bit as well, because we're going to start to talk about the focus impacts. But overall, basically what this cone is saying is that anywhere from southern Gulf County all the way to Tampa could see the center of the storm. And note the timeline there, 7 a.m. on Wednesday. Now, the National Hurricane Center is going with a forecast of 90-mile-per-hour Cat 1 hurricane, but it is possible that it's stronger than that. We could see a Category 2 or 3. It may even be likely a 2 or 3, just depending on how things ramp up and strengthen up, as we're already seeing some signs of organization. So I think a 2 or a 3 is very plausible. I think stronger than a 3, say 4 or 5, seems unlikely at this point, but it is the Gulf of Mexico, and we've seen crazy things happen. I don't think that we're going to be talking about a high-end major hurricane here, but again, like I said, it's the Gulf of Mexico, and intensity forecasts are shot in the dark. None of the modeling suggests that at the moment, but there's certainly the possibility of that, because there's always the possibility of that. In this case, most of the models have been right around a high-end Category 1, but like I said, I think the dynamics certainly are there for a 2 or 3 out of this system if things do go right. I think it's a relatively small-scale storm as it is working its way in. So, Jared, if you'll move us forward here, Going to the next little bit of this graphic, and we'll go to the next graphic here. This is the GFS, and I have kind of modified this a little bit to meet more of the model consensus. The GFS shown here is shifted slightly to the east from the actual output just to bring it more in line with the guidance. But a western shift is still possible. So looking at where we are now going forward in time, by Monday morning, this is working its way into the Gulf of Mexico. By Tuesday evening, this is getting pretty close. By 10 o'clock on Tuesday, this is where I think rapid strengthening will start, is probably Tuesday night going into Wednesday morning for landfall. So hopefully this isn't already really organized by this point in time, and hopefully it's not already a category, high-end category 1 at that point. If that's the case, if it's at the latitude of Tampa and it's a category 1 at that point in time already, or high-end cat 1, then I think you can bet on a 2 or 3 around landfall. This will be moving fairly quickly. As we move this forward, you'll see the timeline for landfall is probably 7, 8, 9 a.m. in the morning. And so we're probably only talking about rapid intensification happening from like 9 p.m. Tuesday to 7 or 8 a.m. Wednesday. So it's not going to have a ton of time under great conditions, but it will have some. So this should start to strengthen, could even go through rapid intensification during those last little bits before it does make landfall. And that does bring in a concern, because a strengthening storm is definitely far worse than a weakening storm, mainly because you get mixing and wind gusts to mix down in that storm. When it's dying, when it's weakening, typically you see less wind gusts. When it's increasing and strengthening, you see more wind gusts. So that's really the difference between a weakening, say, Cat 2 to 1, or a strengthening Cat 1 to 2, or 2 to 3. It's definitely more of a concern whenever that does happen. Sorry, I just looked down and read some comments here. I'm trying to get through all of the comments and as much as I can in the questions on those kinds of things. And it does bear in mind, I know everybody's looking at this and going, this is identical to Hurricane Michael. It's the same case. It's the same thing. It's exactly the same. It does have similarities. Absolutely. It is very similar as far as it's around the Yucatan Peninsula. It's a piece of energy that kind of crossed over from the Eastern Pacific, but there's big differences here. Michael had a lot of time over water, was already a category 1 by the time it crossed near the tip of Cuba. It was well on its way to RI as it got into the Gulf of Mexico, and it rapidly intensified basically from the time it left Cuba to the time it made landfall. So that was from basically Monday night to Wednesday morning. It was going through rapid intensification as it traversed the entire Gulf of Mexico. So we quickly went from a category 1 near Cuba to a category 2 as it made it up to the latitude of, say, Fort Myers, to a category 3 by the time it was the latitude of Tampa, to a category 4 by the time it was, maybe 50, 60 miles offshore, and then a category 5 right as it came on shore. So that's what happened with Michael. That's not really the setup that we have here. The cold front for Michael didn't come in until after it made landfall, so it didn't really have any influence on that. Our cold front for this storm is already going to be in place. So it's already going to be here, already going to be helping to push it off to the east and northeast. So there's that as well. And we had southwest shear with Michael, which actually helped the storm. This time we have westerly shear. And technology has come a long way since 2018. I know we say that with every single storm, but our forecasting ability and intensity forecasting has dramatically increased. It's still a shot in the dark. It still has a long way to go. But we've gotten much, much, much better at that overall forecasting. Plus, this has been really consistent of taking it to the bend. Michael was really consistent of taking it to Bay County. So that should put some ease for all of those that say this is exactly like Michael. No, it's not exactly like Michael. And if you did Michael 100 times over and you just changed one slight variable, Michael wouldn't be like Michael. So let's stop the comparison between those two storms and this, or between that storm and this storm. Every storm's different. Every storm deserves your respect. Every storm should be taken seriously. They all deserve that. You don't necessarily need to compare the two because they're not going to be alike, especially if you live in Bay County and you go through this storm and say, for instance, that this does go through RI and somehow manages the near impossible and gets all the way up to a high-end Category 4 before landfall. Unlikely. Say that happens and it goes into Franklin County or into the Bend or further off to the east. Guess what happens in Bay County? Very little. Very little happens in Bay County in that situation. And that makes it completely different from Michael because you're changing the landfall location. You're changing that. Even if you slid it west and this was a strong Category 4 in Gulf County and you moved it straight inland from there, it still would be a different situation and setup and storm than Michael in Bay County. So your experience is going to be completely different with this storm than that storm. So just get rid of the comparison. I get it. We're all have PTSD when it comes to that, but this is not going to be the same storm. It will be different, I promise. Even if it ends up doing the exact same things, it's going to a different location. It's starting at a different point. It's got a different setup. It will be different for you, which is what I'm trying to say. Everybody is going to experience a different storm here. So just go ahead and get those comparisons out of the way. I get the similarities. I understand it. I'm just as stressed and as anxious about it as well. I went through Michael. I get it. I understand. I'm just saying that from the meteorological aspect, every storm is different. So let's just go through with that. All right, so here we go. Looking at the storm potential, this is the hurricane models. And I do want to highlight what the hurricane models are because everybody sees the scary solutions from social media posts, from whoever is posting. It doesn't matter who it's posting, but they all like to throw out like the H-WRF or the HSFBA or whatever it is, the HMON, it doesn't matter. All of them are hurricane models. And basically the reason why hurricane models spin up and are convectively way overdone is because they are only looking at the 20 kilometers around the actual storm itself, and they're only taking in that environment. They're not taking in environment outside of that 20 kilometers that's directly around the storm. So if within 10 kilometers of the storm, you have perfect conditions, guess what your hurricane model is going to do? It's going to spin it up like crazy. Plus, it has an overarching ramping up with the convective activity. So it has a convective feedback loop, basically meaning that the storms fuel themselves and it over deepens. So whenever you see those scary solutions posted on Facebook or Twitter or wherever, just make sure that you take those with a grain of salt because the hurricane models are really there for hurricane tracks and to give us a good idea of how things can evolve over a short period of time. They're not really for how things can evolve 80, 90 hours down the road. They're meant for how things can evolve within that 15, 20 miles of the coastline. That's what hurricane models were meant for. They're meant for guidance and tracking. And if you look at the intensity guide and you line these hurricane models up with the intensity guide, you'll see that they deepen the storm down to 930, 940, 950, but their intensity is only reflected as a Category 1 or Category 2 hurricane. So how can it be a 930 in the models and only be a Category 2 hurricane? That's because the intensity guide and the actual solution are completely different. So whenever you see these hurricane models, the intensity aspect, when they're just throwing them out on social media, that's not necessarily what we're forecasting as far as intensity goes. And no one should be really posting any single runs anyways, because the single runs don't tell the story. They only give you an idea of one possibility of the storm. It's much better to look at it in this range, which is showing you the ensemble spread on top of where the hurricane models go. The G stands for the latest GFS run. The E stands for the latest European run. And if you're wondering where all of these lines line up, well, most of them are right there just off to the east of Perry. So they're between Gainesville and Perry. That's where almost all of them are. And when we look at these hurricane models for confidence, we want to see grouping. The tighter the grouping, the higher the confidence that the models have figured out what's going on. The bigger the spread, the lower the confidence. So you can see that today the confidence has dramatically increased. The spread has narrowed a lot, and it's still showing basically the exact same location it did on Friday. So there's pretty confident at this point in time that the Bend is going to get a storm. Now, any shifts to the west dramatically increase our impacts in our area. Any shifts to the east dramatically reduce our impacts to the area. So here you can see all of the ensemble spread, yellow being a higher ensemble spread, the orange being the highest ensemble spread, and the green being the lowest. So that means the least amount of members actually impacting that area. So you can tell that over time how this has narrowed down and in to where the location that it is now, but it hasn't changed a whole lot, to be honest. So as we go forward, let's go to the next graphic there, Jared. Yeah, well, as we go forward here, this is the wind speeds based on the GFS, and this is as we ramp things up going to 10 p.m. on Tuesday. Now, keep in mind, yes, I'm breaking my own rule that I just explained and said don't show a deterministic model, and I'm showing you a single-run deterministic model, but I have modified it to make it look very, very close to the rest of guidance. So this should give you a decent idea of what potential is out there if the storm follows guidance based on the last GFS run, matching guidance. So moving this forward as we go to 10 o'clock, you can see the wind speeds ramping up 20 to 30. And then as we get to 3 a.m. on Wednesday, working that a little bit closer to the coast. But this will be east side loaded. And as long as we are on the east or west side of the system, we're on the good side of the system, which means the wind speeds are reduced because of friction force from the land, as well as the forward speed is counteracting the wind speed itself. So moving opposite directions of the wind lessens the wind. Moving the same direction with the wind increases the wind, which is why the east side is the more dangerous side of the storm. If the storm's moving at 20 miles an hour and the wind's blowing 50, well, you can add 20 miles an hour on top of that wind speed because you've got a forward vector of storm motion as well. So it could be 70 miles per hour. Now, the opposite is true on the west side, which is why we always want to be on the west side of the storm, because the forward motion actually counteracts some of the wind speed. So that's why the west side of the storm can have such a dramatic cutoff and differences between them. But even with that said, we should still see 20 to 30 mile per hour winds across a good portion of the area as we move it a little bit forward. You can tell that Perry and right there in the eastern eye wall, that is where the most intense winds are going to be. It's going to be in the eastern eye wall. And again, shifts west, dramatically increase our potential impacts. Shifts east, dramatically decrease our potential impacts, as there's a very sharp cutoff on basically here between where the strongest winds are going to be and where they won't be. So any shifts to the west puts Franklin County, and especially on the coastline, in the core of the storm. And on the west side of the storm, that's really all you're looking out for. You don't want to be in the eye wall in any section of the storm, west, east, north, south, it doesn't matter. So if the eye wall can manage to be further west and brush through Franklin County, especially my concern is Alligator Point. That's where I think that we could potentially see the eye wall brush. Is probably St. George Island, Dog Island, Alligator Point. The eye wall could be very, very close, if not working its way across there. Now, intersection with the coast is what defines a landfall, so you have to have a complete intersection of the low pressure system for landfall. So, no, I don't think based on motion of this storm that this will be far enough west for a landfall in Gulf or Franklin County. Is it impossible? No. Any little shifts in guidance to the west, it is very possible that this ends up further off to the west. It is very, very possible, which is why it's in the cone. However, it is also just as possible that this ends up much further east toward Tampa. And if it ends up more further east toward Tampa, guess what our area sees? Nothing. If this shifts further east than where it currently is at this point in time, then we see very little across our area, if anything, other than just some rain. So that's the kind of margins we're talking about here. Any shift west, and it's a dramatic increase in impacts, especially across Gulf and Franklin counties. Any shift east, and it is a dramatic decrease in any potential impacts across our area, especially in Franklin and Gulf counties, because that's where I expect the most significant amount of impacts to happen. So as we go forward, Jared, go ahead, move this graphic forward on me. You'll see that this moves pretty quickly. By 1 o'clock in the afternoon on Wednesday, after an early morning landfall, we should be wrapping up this storm and moving on out. So this isn't going to be a 12, 15, or like Sally 30, 40-hour event. This is going to be probably a 6 to 8 hour event, so a day event. So if makes landfall in the morning. By the afternoon and evening, we're back to our normal weather conditions. So this should move through pretty quickly, regardless of where it does make landfall, whether it's Gulf County, Franklin County, through the Bend, the Nature Coast, all the way down to Tampa. It should move inland fairly fast and have a fairly fast motion. So that is some good news. As we do go forward here, go ahead. We're going to go to our other graphic, which shows the potential impacts of the wind speed. Just double click there. Yeah, there we go. No, because you're going to show you rain. So as we pull forward, I just forgot what order these were in. Looking at the overall rainfall, I know everybody across the Panhandle here certainly wants rain. I'm one of those. My yard is all burnt to pieces thanks to the heat as of late. So we definitely want some rain. And yeah, Robert Burke agrees. He wants some rain too. We are going to get some rain. The good news here is that there will be plenty of moisture associated with the cold front, and this should sling moisture back across our way. There's even a possibility that a heavier band sets up on the west side of the circulation right against the boundary, wherever that boundary may be, and that potentially could even lead to flooding. I don't think that is a major concern at the moment, but the potential is there. So Jared, move the graphic forward for me so we can go through this. Now, the GFS is way too broad and way too smooth. So it's not going to show you what thunderstorms can do, what these bands can do, which can obviously drop an inch in an hour or 2 inches in an hour. So any of the numbers you see here, you can double and triple, and those are still possible. So with tropical systems, I usually say double the number. Here, I think that there's a narrow section where you could probably triple the number, and that could still be possible. So certainly, even you're seeing the guidance here, you're going to see maybe 1, 2, 3 inches, but I think it could be much, much higher than that. So move forward here on the GFS. So you see a nice big blob there across the Forgotten Coastline, back up to Tallahassee, where we see probably 2 to 5 inches of rain. And then thanks to the dry air being wrapped around on the west side, there's a pretty sharp cutoff on the west side of this. But again, we're going to see more moisture from this just because the frontal boundary is going to be around. We'll have showers in and around the area. I think for the most part, majority of the Panhandle should pick up anywhere between 1 and 4 inches of rain as we work through Thursday. So that's the good news. The bad news is you can see that narrow strip of heavy rain on the west side of the circulation. Remember, if the circulation goes in around where the 5-inch mark is, note that all the heavy rain is on the very western banding of the eye wall. So it's probably going to get stacked up on the northwest side, much like what we saw with Fred. As this is making landfall, we're probably going to see that friction force with the boundary as well as land load up all of the reflectivity and the moisture on that northwest side of the circulation. So it's probably going to be a narrow band of very heavy rain that works up through the bend. So I've generalized this forecast for you. That should be the next graphic and highlight with that as well. So let's move this forward if we can. There we go. So this is also going to show you, eventually you're going to see the spaghetti models come in here too, because I wanted to overlay this, but this is highest potential wind impacts as the forecast is right now, and that is the latest hurricane model guidance. So you can see that Franklin County coastline, southern Gulf County coastline, that is where I am most concerned about. And in my opinion, it's going to be the islands, St. George, Dog, and even going out toward Alligator Point that has the highest potential to be impacted by greater than hurricane force winds. As you work inland into Franklin County, we should see a drop off in the winds pretty quickly. And then as you work toward Bay, Calhoun, Liberty, Jackson, you're going to see a much less in the way of wind impact. We'll still have some gusty conditions and some winds the further west you go, but if you think back to storms of the past, there is typically, especially with a cold front, a very sharp cutoff on rainfall and wind on the west side. So that said, don't be surprised if that Bay County, this storm passes where it's forecasted right now. Don't be surprised if you're in Bay County and you only have winds 15 to 25 miles an hour as this storm is passing off, and we only see a couple gusts over 30. That would not surprise me at all. Any shifts to the east, and our winds even drop off even less than that. But as it stands right now, I still think that any potential shifts to the west could bring higher wind speeds. So it's still important that we continue to watch and prep and be ready just in case this ends up being closer to Franklin County. Because obviously, if this shifts all west, ends up closer to Franklin County, then you see a dramatic increase in potential impacts, not only here, but also in Franklin and Gulf County, as well as Calhoun, Bay, Liberty, going up even into Jackson. Now, Walton County, if you're in Walton and Okaloosa County, you're in Holmes County, you're in northern Walton County, you're in much of Washington County, this is probably a nothing storm for you. You're probably not going to see much other than some rain as this storm does pass off to the east. So, yeah, probably not a big deal there for our inland counties, Jackson, Washington, Holmes, and Walton. I think that you guys can probably breathe easy. This is likely not going to impact you all that much other than some rain, maybe some light wind. But obviously big shifts to the west would dramatically increase impacts there as well. So that really does have to continue to be the messaging until this really gets locked in. I'm fairly confident because we've seen now almost 3 days of the modeling showing basically the same area in that red area. That's been where the models have kind of windshield wipered back and forth. It's been as far west as Gulf County. It's been as far east as Tampa with the models over the last 3 days. And I don't think we see any major significant shifts unless we get a reformation of the low or something weird happens with the storm overall. I don't think that strength is really going to depict whether we see a more northerly track or a more westerly or easterly track. For reference, the H-WRF, one of the hurricane models, I don't have in here actually because it was such an outlier, had the storm go toward Bradenton and deepened it down to like a 940. So strength isn't really going to be an impact overall in where this goes. This is being influenced by little tiny forces, an upper level low that's getting out, as well as a cold front coming in and just a slight pull in pressure gradients force thanks to Franklin. So Franklin has strengthened so fast and deepened so fast that it is actually an acting force on Idalia as well. So that could help to shift it to the east. And again, I want to reiterate, we saw this last year with Ian. If you live in Tampa, if you live in Spring Hill, if you live in Bradenton, please pay attention, watch out with the storm, because these things coming in at this type of angle can easily have friction force pull them east and take a harder turn to the right. So if you live Spring Hill to Gainesville, I would be on high alert of this being a harder turn to the right, because it isn't a question of if it's going to turn. The question is, how much of a turn does it make? Is it a generalized east-northeast movement, or does it take a harder right-hand turn and become northeast movement? And if that's the case, if that happens early, then you're talking about a much further south and east solution than what we have. And that is far more likely in this scenario than westerly shifts, because we have a cold front coming in. That cold front is basically acting as a barrier. It's not going to blow through the cold front. And for those that are bringing up the GFS in mind, my weather nerdy friends that are watching this and have been watching those operational models from the GFS and everything being west, everything being west, everything being west, that is because the GFS did not pick up the cold front. If you go back and look up those model runs, you can look up the sea level pressure, and you'll see that there's no troughing on the east side of the coast on the GFS. And the GFS was the only one doing that. I don't know what's going on there. I don't know why it does that. I don't know why it missed it, but it did. And that's what allowed that westerly shift. This morning, guess what's in the model run for the GFS? The trough. The cold front is there, and that's why you saw the GFS shift east. I wouldn't be shocked if you saw the GFS on the 18Z that'll be coming out in a couple of hours shift even further east. Probably more in line with where the hurricane models are. The Euro came in basically on top of where the hurricane models are. So moving forward, this is, confidence continues to grow. Here we go. This is what I wanted to show for rainfall totals. So generalized, we're going to see rain showers and thunderstorms over the next couple of days. Monday and Tuesday, we'll have pop-up activity with the cold front that'll be around. And you can tell here that narrow banding on the west side. So big shifts to the west, and this probably brings up way higher numbers as far as rainfall totals. Shifts to the east, and yeah, we're still probably looking at a generalized 1 to 2, 1 to 3 kind of range of rainfall. So our area across the Panhandle more or less is going to get the influence from the upper low, where we're getting the rain today. As the upper low moves out with the pop-up activity and the cold fronts coming in the next couple of days, we're going to have shower and thunderstorm activity around for our Tuesday as well. And then the question is just how much moisture do we get from Idalia based on track. So track is really important on based overall effects and impacts. And you'll note based on the core of the storm, based on the trail that you see here, this is going to be a small core. I don't think we're going to have a really large system here as far as where the winds travel out from. And this is going to be a really tight little storm, which means it's good news for everyone that's not impacted by that tight little core, but everybody that's outside of that or inside of that tight little core, it could be quite significant if things really get going. So hopefully that's not the case, but I do think this will be a relatively small core, which probably even lessens impact even further off to the west. So probably mean a sharper gradient than a weaker gradient. Usually the tighter the core, the bigger the gradient you have as you go away from the system on the west side, and then you can kind of bring that in on the east side. And you can see that represented here on the rainfall. Note 3 to 7 works all the way down the coast. That's because the east side loaded storm. That's because the winds will be out of the southwest on the east side of the system. So all the moisture gets pumped up into the peninsula, and they desperately need rain on the western coast of Florida. So in that aspect, minus the wind, this is really good news for the west coast of Florida, outside of the fact that this could make a tighter turn, and this possibly could be a 2, possibly even a 3 at landfall, and nobody wants to deal with no one wants to deal with a 2. Certainly nobody ever wants to deal with a major. So, but that is a possibility, and hopefully that's not the case. Hopefully this is just a close shave, but if you are in Franklin County and Gulf County, I would be getting prepared for a category 2 or 3, and I would have the mindset that it's going to make landfall in Southern Gulf or Franklin County. If you are in Liberty County, I'd be keeping a really close eye on this, especially Southern Liberty. We don't have a ton of population in Southern Liberty, but I would definitely keep an eye on this. Weewahitchka, I'd be keeping an eye on this. As of the way it stands right now, Weewahitchka, you're probably not getting much. You're going to have the rain and a little bit of wind. But if this shifts west, then you see your impacts in Weewahitchka ramp up massively. Then all of a sudden you're talking about a lot of rain and more wind, possibly 40, 50, 60 mile per hour winds if this shifts west. So that's where we are. That's where we're standing right now. I'm going to get to the questions. I'm going to try to scroll through here. I've seen a lot of your comments going on through. I'm going to try to break down whatever I can and whatever I missed. If I did answer the question already, we'll try to just quickly address it, or we'll move past it. If not, then I'll try to answer those questions. So if you have any questions, you can go ahead and put them in the comments. I've seen a couple off the top of my head here. Spencer, if you want to get us started. What we got? If the storm slows down more, is there a chance it misses the cold front? Isn't that pull more east? Is it more east? Yeah, that's a good question. So it's starting to move north. So I don't think that movement is really going to be all that much of an impact as it starts to get ejected by the incoming trough. So the cold front is actually what lifts it out of its current position. So as it starts to feel the influence of that upper level low and the next frontal boundary, that's what's going to start to lift this off to the north, which appears is already happening. So I don't think that we're really going to see a slowing down of the storm, but if we're playing theoretical here, slowing down of the storm potentially could just mean more time over water, which might mean a more organized and strengthened storm, depending on shear. But the shear is in place for now. That will lift at some point in time as we go throughout the day on Monday, as that cold front comes in and starts to remove that shear. That's when we'll start to see this storm really get its act together, is as we go through the day tomorrow, and then certainly into tomorrow night and Tuesday. That's when we should start to see the storm really start to look like a storm, because as you look at it now, you can see the influence of that northerly and westerly shear. Everything, all of the convection is on the south and east side of the storm, which is part of the reason why it did meander south and east, is because it was following the convection. So it's being heavily sheared right now, but that's not going to last forever. So slowing it down doesn't really change a whole lot. At least in my opinion, mainly because we don't see a dramatic change in setup even after the storm does move through. We're still going to have a trough off to our west, and we're probably still going to be seeing some unsettled conditions thanks to that trough on the west. So if we don't get enough rain from Idalia, we'll probably have showers and thunderstorms around through the rest of the week into the weekend as well, which will likely bring us more rain. So I think we're heading into a wetter pattern. So I don't necessarily think that we see any major changes with this as far as speed and timing, but that's a good question. I don't think that forward speed here other than how it impacts land as it's moving across. I don't think that forward speed is going to play all that much of a role in the system's guidance, to be honest. So it's a good question. Do these models include data from the storm hunters who went out today, increase the... Yes. So the 12Z model runs did have Hurricane Hunter data in it, which is why it shouldn't have been a surprise that they both showed pretty similar solutions, both the Euro and the GFS, because it did have that ingested. So yes, that was included in there, and you can tell that right there with the G and the E, with the solid grouping. The E came in, the Euro came in right on top of where all the hurricane models put it. The G came in, the GFS came in just a little bit off to the west of where all the hurricane models put it. And that's mainly because the GFS is playing catch up. It missed the cold front over the last couple of days. It was too far west, and now it's catching up to the rest of the models that were east. So unfortunately, it's another case of the GFS really scaring the snot out of a lot of people here when it didn't need to. This could be an impactful event for our area, and I think that we will have some impact, especially across Franklin and Gulf County, where, again, you should be preparing for a Category 2 or 3 just in case this moves west. That's what you should be doing. I think the eye could be very close to those islands, if not just offshore of the island. The core of the storm, the eye wall, could be very close to the Franklin County coastline. Even if it doesn't move ashore in Franklin County, you will have impacts there. We will see storm surge. We will have wind. We are going to have rain issues and some wind issues in Franklin and Gulf County. That is going to happen. Southern Gulf, more so than Northern Gulf. Northern Gulf, probably very little impacts. Southern Gulf near Indian Pass, probably much bigger impacts. So it just depends on where you are. If you're in Cape San Blas, Port St. Joe, I'd be keeping a really close eye on this, and I definitely would do all my storm prep stuff. I'm not sure if I would necessarily want to be boarding anything up just yet. I think I might wait until tomorrow afternoon and see what the forecast shows then, and see if this has continued to shift east or if this has shifted back west. And if it looks a little more likely that it's going to be moving inland in Franklin County, so west of Perry, then I would definitely start to do my boarding preparations and things like that as well. And as far as travel notices and evacuations and all of that kind of stuff, emergency managers are going to issue all of that out, and they'll do that about 24 to 48 hours out. So that'll all really start happening probably tomorrow evening and throughout the day on Tuesday. That's when you're going to get that, if it's even warranted. Right now in Bay County, that's not warranted. In Washington County, in Jackson County, in Calhoun County, it's not warranted. None of that is warranted because at the moment we would be seeing very little other than just some rain and some gusty conditions in those counties based off of the forecast that we do have at the current moment. So, it just depends. Certainly, I'd be doing all of the things to take precaution that you need to do, and I'd get all of the little prep stuff out of the way, bring in those yard ornaments, and if you've got umbrellas and tables outside, bring them down, take them into the house, bring them into the garage, make sure you've got your yard all cleaned up and ready for storm. Prep the house a little bit, get that ready to go. If you need to board up, say the time comes that we're saying this is headed this direction and you're going to need to board up, I'd certainly want to, especially the closer you get to this storm, closer you are to the Forgotten Coast, I definitely would be ready to do so. If you're further away from the Forgotten Coast, top off the hurricane kits. If you don't have a hurricane kit, go make a hurricane kit. You can find that on disaster.org, or you can go to our website. We have a whole list on mypanhandle.com about what you need in case of a disaster. We always preach the 72, which means be ready for the 72 hours after the storm when you are unreachable. That's what the 72 means, because after a major system works through, not saying that this is going to be one, but there is a possibility of that. You need to be ready to be able to survive on your own for 72 hours without help, without power, without water, without your toilets working. All of those things need to be thought of before the storm goes. That's why we say prepare for the 72. And then you want to have supplies for everybody that is there, everybody that is in your home. You need to have enough supplies for them to live on their own off of that supply for 7 days. That's what we learned in Hurricane Michael. It used to be like 4 or 5 days. Now you need a week. You need at least a week of supplies. As we now know that it can be so bad that you can't get to people for over a week. So be able to survive on your own for 72 without help, and then have the supplies, the water, the food that you need to survive for a week. If you do plan on staying and you are placed inside of where this storm is going to go. So if you're going to have the core go right over the top of you, those are the precautions that you need. If you're outside of that and you prep like crazy for this storm and it does miss us to the east, great. You're ready for hopefully what is next year's storms, or maybe even 3 years down the road storms, because hopefully we don't have to do this again this season. But we'll see. We'll see how things go. So there's no over prepping. It's not possible. You can always prep, be ready. I always say prepared, not scared, because in my mind, that's what being scared in these situations is. It just means you don't know what's going on. And when you don't know what's going on, you're going to be anxious. You're going to be scared. You're going to be worried. You're not going to be able to control anything. So that's going to amp things up. But when you're prepared, when you have things ready to go, when you have your kit ready to go, you have your go bag ready to go, you have all your supplies on hand, that's going to ease that a lot. Because then it's, okay, storm comes, well, we can do this. I know where I want to go if I want to evacuate. I know how I'm going to get there if I want to evacuate. I know a place that I can stay. If I want to stay at home, I have such and such supplies. I'm ready to go. I have batteries. I've got gas. I've got all my stuff charged up and ready. So that all of those things are just going to make your life so much easier in thought and in physical emotion as we get ready for a storm. So hopefully this is just a close shave, and all we're doing is just a trial run of hopefully nothing, and we're just prepped and ready for the next one. That is the hope here, is that this could go east, and it could shift east. Now the reality is this could end up in Franklin and Gulf County, and if it does end up in Franklin and Gulf County, then the impacts increase across the rest of the area, and there could be significant impacts in Franklin and Gulf County, especially Alligator Point. I think that's probably, to me, the highest likelihood of having the eye wall or core go across is probably through Alligator Point. So in that area, I would be prepped and ready to go. It's a low-lying spot. You only got one road going in. In my opinion, if I was living out there, I probably wouldn't stay. I know it's just going to be a 2 or 3, but that's just me, just based on where the storm is and that location out on Alligator Point. I probably wouldn't be out there. Same thing, St. George Island, Dog Island. I wouldn't be riding it out on an island. That's for sure. That would not be what I would want to do. I'd go inland, just get over to Gulf County, go visit Port St. Joe and, add some tourism dollars to Port St. Joe or something like that. Make it a little vacation while the storm passes if you're out on Alligator Point or Carabel, something like that. That's just me. That's my personal preference. If I don't have to ride something out, I don't have to be there. I don't want to be there. But everybody has their own tolerance and their own comfort and what they're willing to put up with in the storm and after the storm. And you better than I know you. So make the decisions based on how you think that you can handle this, and go with that. Whatever is to your comfort, go with that. I'm certainly not going to make the decisions for you. It's not my place to make the decisions for you. So, that's where I stand on that. Let's get back to the questions as I just stand here ranting. I think I saw, I want to say, I know I saw something else. If you got any questions, comments, or concerns, go ahead and put them into the comments. So I think I probably answered this, but Jennifer Hawkins asked, if it's stronger than a Category 1, would that increase our wind speeds in Panama City? Here it's the gradient. So where the storm goes is going to be the biggest impact on overall wind speeds across our area. Strength really isn't going to change all that much because it's the gradient. So even if you ramp it up, even if it's a Category 5 and it makes landfall in Perry, we'd have gusty, windy conditions in Bay County, but it still wouldn't be that bad because we're on the western side. Our wind's coming out of the east, out of the north and east. So you've got friction force that's reducing it. We're talking 20, 30 miles per hour at most as it is. We get 40, 50 mile per hour wind gusts in our regular thunderstorms. all throughout the summer. You get 40, 50 mile per hour gusts in those. So, as it stands right now, that the wind is really not an issue outside of Franklin and Gulf County for most of the area. Now, if you're offshore, if you've got a boat, if you got something you're tied up, then I would definitely be paying attention because the winds will be greater over the water than they will be on land because that friction force is really what nullifies it. So even if you strengthen this up, the winds don't really increase all that much. We might increase maybe another 10 miles an hour. So we go from 30 mile per hour wind gusts to 40 mile per hour wind gusts. Or if this is the highest of high in storms, which is not the forecast, but if it was, then you ramp it up to possibly 40 or 50 mile per hour winds. So again, the gradient on the western side is really tight. We saw that with Michael too. So running into a cold front, you go just a couple miles west of the eye wall in Michael, and you saw a dramatic decrease in damages. By the time you get 10, 15 miles west of where Michael made landfall, there's basically no damages. So that gives you the idea of just how fast winds drop off on the western side. Eastern side, winds can extend well away from center. Even the northeast side, you can have the winds extend well away from the center. But western side, it's pretty rare to see winds extend all that far away from the center unless you got something weird going on, some kind of odd setup. So in this case, I don't see any dramatic increase in winds unless we get a westward shift. So a shift in the track brings higher wind speeds. I don't think that strength really impacts it all that much. So good question there. That was a good one. Let's see here. I think somebody just asked. So yeah, that's a good question too. So storm surge, I didn't address it here yet, mainly because storm surge is affected by forward speed, the size of the storm, as well as the strength of the storm. So with us being on the west side of the storm for much of the area, our storm surge will probably be initial and then reduced as the storm goes to our east. So we'll actually have a reverse surge at some point in time as that storm does pass off to the east. As of now, I would say that we're probably across much of the area going to see 1 to 3 as far as storm surge goes before the storm gets here, and then we'll see it back off as the storm passes off to the east. Now, Franklin and Gulf County with that southeast facing shoreline, I could plausibly see maybe 3 to 6, possibly even maybe even higher than that, maybe 4 to 7 on the storm surge, just based on track. So how it goes. St. Mark's to Perry, right there in that nook, the water's kind of going to get pushed up into that nook. So that might end up being one of the higher spots of storm surges through St. Mark's over in that area, just because of the bend of how it will all get funneled up into the bend. So that is definitely a concern. As storm surge forecasts start to come out, we're going to release those products and we'll explain more with what's going on. But right now, we don't have any storm surge projections, mainly because we're still just trying to figure out the track and the strength of that. So impacts and the impact forecast will get less generalized over the next 24, 48 hours. So I always tell people you get 3 days. This is your 3 days. So Franklin and Gulf County, Monday, Tuesday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. This is your 3 days. This is your warning. You get 3 days. You just saw all the models narrow down and give us a good idea. We were fairly confident that this is headed toward the Perry area. So this is your 3 days. This is the information that we have. We're going to narrow in that forecast. But major shifts, probably not likely unless it shifts hard east. So that is good news on our end, is that it's more likely that we have a dramatic shift east thanks to friction force versus a dramatic shift west. So that's the good news here. We could see it shift all the way to possibly between Franklin and Gulf. I think that's a plausibility here because that's not that much of a difference in error. Just a slight wobble on the track could make it that far west based on where it is now. Now, obviously, as we go in time, that's going to narrow. The error is going to narrow, and we'll see. We'll be more and more confident, and every model run that we get that continues to show the same exact locations, that increases the confidence in this forecast. But those impacts like storm surge and wind speeds and all of that, that's going to be discussed a lot over the next couple of days. So that's why you still want to be checking on the forecast, plus the possibility of any changes. So that's a good question. You know how specific location and questions you already answered. I might just reiterate. You can watch this again. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so we're getting a lot of questions that have been asked already. So this will be posted to mypanhandle.com and it will be on our social medias as well. So as soon as we wrap up here, you'll be able to rewatch this and catch all of the things that you may have missed out of it. So there's that as well. If you are looking for more information, I constantly update my social media. I'll probably update another 2 times today. You can also check out more information on mypanhandle.com. Well, there you go. There's the new cone. So they have, in fact, increased it to 100 mile per hour. So now they are in agreement with me that this could be a 2. So you always prepare for over the category over what is forecasted. So they're saying 2, you need to prep for a 3. And if they're saying 2, then you really need to be ready for a 3 or a 4. Because again, intensity forecasting is a shot in the dark. Let's hope that the forecast is right and that this is not stronger than forecasted, but they have increased it up to a 2, which, I think that is probably where model consensus is right now. But if we see better organizing and we see a stronger storm, then this could certainly increase that potential for this to be stronger as well. So do keep that in mind. I know everyone, again, I've already talked about this quite a lot on, people talking about, oh, well, Michael was a category 2 the night before. No, it wasn't. It was not a category 2 the night before. It was a category 3 Tuesday morning at 11 a.m. because you go back and look at the notifications and the advisories issued out. That's when it first became a major hurricane. Tuesday morning at 11 a.m. That's when it became a category 3. So no, that Michael did not go from a 2 to a 5 overnight. That did not happen. What happened is people watched the forecast on Sunday and then didn't check again until Wednesday. And then they were like, it happened overnight. No, it didn't. We just weren't paying attention enough. You're ahead of the game. You're paying attention. You're paying attention here. So you're not going to miss if this intensity forecast ramps up. If it ramps up to a 3 or a 4, you're not going to miss it because you're paying attention. That's why we tell you to check the forecast frequently, because the weather is not an exact science. It's a probability game. We're telling you what's most likely. We're not telling you what's going to happen. We're not God. We do not control the weather. We cannot make it change. We cannot make it happen. All we can do is tell you what's most likely to happen. That's our job. I know we like to be the butts of the joke and everyone likes to make fun of us, but that's our job. Our job is to tell you what's most likely to happen, not what the highest end probability is or the lowest end probability is. We try to explain where the uncertainties are, and we try to give you the best idea of what potentially is going to happen. We don't have the luxury of being the social media guys that can just pound the table and say every storm is going to be strong. And then when they're wrong, they get to go back and go, I'm not a professional. We can't do that because that's not who we are. We're professionals. We have integrity in our forecast, and we have a communication aspect and reliability to you guys to be as right as possible, which means we're going to go with the numbers. We're going to go with the probability. We're going to go with the most likelihood. We're not going to give you the extreme scenarios. I try to address that with uncertainties, but that's not what we're going to do because we can't go back after the storm and go, oh, we were wrong. We told you it was going to be a category 5. It ended up being a category 2. Like, I can't communicate that. So I don't have that luxury. If you want to go look for a doomsday projection on this storm, there's plenty of it on social media. You can find it somewhere else, I promise. Somebody else on social media will probably be posting the H-WAR for something like that, and you'll see a 9:15 or a 9:19 or a 9:20 deepened storm as it progresses across the Gulf of Mexico. We're not going to do that because that's just not the probability at the moment. It could be down the road, but it's not the probability at the moment. So there should be some limiting factors in strength here. There is a possibility of rapid intensification, especially as it gets from Tampa to the coastline. So I think this will be a strengthening storm coming ashore, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it'll be a 2 strengthening to a 3. It could be a high end 2 getting ready to be a 3 as it's doing that. So you just want to pay attention to as this thing organizes and how the intensity forecast changes, because as I've mentioned a lot already, intensity forecasting is a shot in the dark. Their models have gotten a lot better, and the dynamics and all of that in play have gotten much more figured out. So we have a much better idea of how these things play out and what allows them to deepen and what allows them to rapidly deepen, all of those kinds of things. This has a perfect environment basically halfway through the Gulf of Mexico. Until then, it doesn't really have a perfect environment. So it should be limited by its time over water where it's got a perfect environment. But if it organizes and say, if you see tonight that it is a Category 1 or tomorrow that it's a Category 1 already, then I can promise you, you'll see the intensity forecast jump. It's the same thing that happened with Michael. Yeah, originally it was forecasted to be a Category 1. And then on the third advisory, it was a Category 1. And that's when they started forecasting major hurricane. On the fifth advisory, it was all major hurricane in the forecast. So no, people just didn't pay attention to Michael. I'm just tired of hearing how fast it was. And people just didn't pay attention. That's all that really happened. To be completely honest, is that people just didn't pay attention. They watched the original forecast, they assumed that it was going to be a weak storm, and they stopped paying attention. And then they were wrong when it was a strong storm because they didn't pay attention. So don't be like that. This is not that case. Learn your lesson. Pay attention. Continue to watch the forecast and see how this changes. Because again, we're not God. We cannot tell you exactly what the storm is going to be and exactly when it's going to make landfall, exactly where. We're playing the numbers. That's what we're doing. That's our job. So we're trying to communicate what those numbers are. All right. Let's go. Do we have any other questions? I think that's a good spot to wrap. I've ranted enough. Let's go on to, if you have got any questions or I missed anything or didn't answer your questions, something like that, you can go to my Facebook page and you can ask those questions there. Keep in mind that there's a system headed in this direction and that I get asked a ton of questions. So I might not be all that responsive as I typically am, just from the fact that I'm getting asked a bunch of questions. But we'll leave you here with the latest cone, which has updated to a potential Category 2 making landfall. And note that they also increased the timeline here. So 1 a.m. Wednesday morning. So this is faster. They also shifted it further east. So now Bay County and most of Gulf County is no longer in the cone. Still includes Franklin County, portions of Liberty County, and then back up through the bend. So this is right in line with the rest of the guidance. This is exactly where I have been saying for a couple of days I thought it would go. It's probably the bend. If you are in Tampa, Bradenton, further south, again, friction forces with these things are not included in the models, and that could allow this to turn harder. Just when is on the turn aspect is when do we get that turn? How fast is it? And friction force sometimes can increase that. So just pay attention, especially Tampa north, Tampa to Spring Hill. I would really be paying attention to this for potential changes in the track. If you are through the bend, the Nature Coast, and southern Franklin and Gulf counties, prep. Go ahead. You should be prepping today, prep tomorrow. Make sure you're ready for a 2 or a 3 to make landfall and impact that area, because that is still a possibility. And if this continues to shift east and we see very little across our area, great. I hope that's the case. I hope we just get some rain showers and we get some rain that we need and we don't have to deal with any of the storm. That would be fantastic. I would love that. So hopefully that's the case, but we do have to prep for the reality that we could be talking about a storm impacting our area. So get the mindset ready for that. Be ready. Let's do this. We're going to get through this together. And even if we do have to deal with the storm, it'll be okay. We're going to make it through. If you made it through Michael, you can make it through another storm. It'll be just fine. We've had Sally, we've had Fred, we've had Marco, we've had Danny. We've had a ton of storms since Michael that have impacted this area, and we made it through all of those. So this is not going to be any different. Idalia, we'll make it through Idalia too. So it's going to be okay. Just prep and continue to keep up with the forecast. We're going to continue to update. Oh, I do want to mention mypanhandle.com. We are going to be posting the cone. Every time we get a cone, we should be posting that out. So you should be getting new information and updates on mypanhandle.com with the cone in there. And we'll do little blurps on that. If we are put under a hurricane watch or hurricane warning or tropical storm watch or tropical storm warning, we'll start to do more cut-ins and updates as well. I do think that Franklin and Gulf counties will be under a watch and a warning at some point in time. The rest of the area may get put under a watch. It's definitely probable that a tropical storm watch gets posted across our area, if not a hurricane watch, just with the proximity. So I think that is very plausible and maybe even likely, unless we see a big shift to the east. So just be aware of that you may get watches and you may see watches posted as we go throughout the day tomorrow. That doesn't mean the forecast has changed. That just means that they're posting watches for just in case. So again, we've got a long way to go watching the storm. We got a lot of things that can change watching the storm. But I think we're in a good place on preparation and hopefully good place mindset wise of how we're going to go through the storm, how we're going to handle it and be ready and prepped for it. And certainly we're going to keep you apprised of any new information that comes in and any new changes, including intensity, including location, all of those things. We're going to continue to communicate that to you. So for now, Franklin and Gulf County, that's my main concern. The rest of the area, prep to comfort, keep a close eye on the storm. And what I mean by prep to comfort is do all the preparations that you need to make you feel like you're ready for the storm. At the moment, I wouldn't say that includes boarding up your home or doing any kind of evacuations, but if you just have such bad anxiety that you can't handle any storm being around, then maybe it's not a bad idea. So just prep to comfort. Whatever is going to make you feel good about being able to go through this storm, that's what you should be doing. Franklin and Gulf counties, you should be prepping for a full-on hurricane and ready to go through that. Prep home, property, make sure you got the kits, and make sure you got an idea and a plan in place just in case this is further west, and that you know what you're going to do if that were to happen. That's what you should be doing. So that's a good place to leave it. I think we've lost about half of our viewing audience as of this point because I've talked for so long. But if you missed any of this, you can catch it on mypanhandle.com, or you can check it out on social media or review it, I think, on every platform that is being live on. So yes, there you go. So thanks to our sponsors. And of course, catch the latest Storm Track 13 app, mypanhandle.com, and our social media.